Hello. Here we are. Welcome. You guys are all sitting in the back. The front seats are closer to the action. Anyway, welcome. I'm glad you're all here. This is our second night of a fabulous final week of summer workshops. We have a great lineup for you tonight. My name is David Simpson. First of all, I'm the program director here at the Work Center. My pronouns are he, him, his. Woo! What's that again? Sorry. Oh, stop really soon. Tonight we have a great lineup. We're going to hear from writer Julie Glass. We're going to hear from visual artist Forrest Williams. Where's that guy? Where is he? There's over there. Woo woo! And we're going to hear from printmaker Simonette Quamina. Did you say Quamina? Quamina, yeah. Whew, that's good. Okay, I like to get the names right. Yes, and before a little bit of housekeeping, which you probably all have heard, this weekend, starting Friday, the lounge is going to be closed. The common room is going to be closed. The lounge is closed all the time because we're renovating it. The common room is closed this weekend, and the gallery because we're doing the private thing with Poetry in America. So it won't be available if you want to browse books or buy merch or look at the art exhibits. So if you want to do so, please do so before Friday and get your books and T-shirts while they're available. After the reading tonight, Julie will be signing books at the back of the room, and you'll be able to find books from other faculty who are here this week. Lots of other books in the gallery of other faculty members and people associated with the Work Center. Please be sure to check it out, as well as the wonderful exhibition we have up this summer called Everyone We Know Is Here, curated by former fellow Heidi Hahn and featuring work by 20 or so former Falk Fellows. It's a gorgeous show. Am I saying exactly the same words as I said yesterday? Not exactly the same, I'm sorry. Somebody said they liked it because it was kind of a ritual, so I took some comfort in that. But anyway, I'll just continue to do little side bits of commentary as I go through this to make it more interesting. As always, shout out to East End Books for managing our bookstore. And also to Cape Cod 5 Savings Bank for so generously supporting our summer public programming this summer. Sharon is doing this. And I kept,
Special shout out to Julian Sear, who does so much for
Woo! Julian Sear. The restrooms continue to be down the hall. And the sign-up sheet is looking great. Good job, people. There's more than one page of people signed up. If you haven't signed up, run, don't walk safely after the event is over and sign up. You won't be sorry that you did. And finally, let's just turn our cell phones to silent. I know you probably think, oh, it's at silent, but there's those alarms and things that go off even, so make them quiet. And then let's get started. I only met novelist Julia Glass on Sunday when she showed up to teach the workshop. And I only met Julie via email 1 week before because I just found out that Danny Shapiro would be unable to teach her workshop because of an injury she had sustained in a fall. What were we going to do? You all know as well as I do how beloved Danny is and how fervent her students are who take her workshops year after year. How could we find someone to replace Danny? It would have to be someone of similar creative accomplishment, with comparable experience and talent as a teacher, and someone Danny's students would be willing to trust to teach in her place. Of course, my colleague Sarah, God bless her, didn't hesitate for a second. Julia Glass, she said. And of course she was right. She 100% fit the qualifications and had the added value of having taught summer workshops at Falk for many years. She was exactly the right choice. But the workshop was due to start in a week. What are the chances that Julie would be able to do it? I emailed her, trying not to get my hopes up, but Julie didn't hesitate. I phoned you, that's right. I didn't even wait to do the email thing. I called you, thank you. She goes, I just need to move a few things around, including a pickleball game. Is that? Badminton, that's right. Oh, right. Badminton, not pickleball. FYI, there's a great play at Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater playing right now called the Pickleball Wars that is hysterical. So if you have a chance to go see it, please do. It's really great. But anyway, it was pickleball. It was badminton, not pickleball. I felt my blood pressure down as opposed to now, took a breath and relaxed. Julie would save the day. I'm so grateful to her for stepping into the breach, for bringing her prodigious artistic talent and success, her deep teaching experience, and her love for Falk, not to mention her grace and kindness to the Work Center, and for rescuing our final week of summer workshops. She is quite certainly the most accomplished and talented sub that ever walked into a classroom. Oprah Daly wrote that in her 7th novel, Vigil House, Julia makes addictive, accessible art from unanswerable questions. The New York Times wrote that Julia is a masterful builder of fictional people, an expert at charting the architecture of entire lives. And the New Yorker declared that she writes so well that what might seem like farce is rich, absorbing, and full of life. And finally, the New York Times Book Review wrote that her first book, National Book Award-winning novel 3 Junes, brilliantly rescues, then refurbishes the traditional plot-driven novel. Julia Glass is the author of the novels Vigil House, A House Among the Trees, and The Dark Sacred Night, The Widower's Tale, The Whole World Over, and the National Book Award-winning 3 Junes. Her third book, I See You Everywhere, is a collection of linked stories, and it won the Binghamton University John Gardner Award for Fiction. She has won fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and her personal essays have been widely anthologized. In addition to teaching fiction writing at Emerson, Julia is a co-founder of the nonprofit arts program 20 Summers here in Provincetown, and a longtime member of the Fine Arts Work Center workshop faculty. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Julia Glass.
Thank you so much, David. I'm so thrilled to be back here. 2 weeks ago, I had no idea that I would be, and here I am. I also just want to say to all you back row people that I can see you leave just as easily as if you sit in the front rows. So feel free to move up if you like. There's not a force field here. Wow, okay, so I am, once in a while I read from Work in Progress. I'm not really quite ready to do that here, but I am gonna read from a section of Vigil Harbor that I have not read from before, so we'll see how this goes. Vigil Harbor is a novel that takes place in a scenic, historic, and very privileged fictional town north of Boston. It is nakedly based on the town where I live, Marblehead. The events take place about a decade from now, a time in which geography really has a lot to do with destiny, especially in relation to climate change. I mean, we look around the world at us, you know, Maui right now, Ukraine, and sometimes where you live is your fate. But even in the most privileged places, mayhem may arrive. And that's in part what this book is about the puncturing of the bubble in a very privileged community. Now, there are 8 main characters in this book, 6 of whom are citizens of Vigil Harbor, and 2 of whom are strangers who come to town separately and whose agendas will steer the events of just a few days. So one of the Vigil Harborites is an architect named Austin Kepner. He's a very successful architect who builds houses designed to withstand the increasingly violent storms on the coast. He has a background in New York. His distant past as an architect there is one he mostly guards to himself, and there is a secret relationship in his past. It's a relationship of which he's somewhat ashamed and guilty, and it came to a very tragic end. And one of the strangers who comes to town is determined to out that secret. She is a woman who was also in love with the woman he had the relationship with. And I'm going to read the flashback to that time and that relationship in New York City. I am also going to open my water, hopefully not spill it. And What would Austin Kepner say about why he left New York? Whatever he feels the truth to be all these years later, he would probably not say that he fled. He might say that he evolved. He might say that he needed to settle somewhere better aligned with his ambitions. But at gatherings where people trade their ambivalent memories of the city, many in Vigil Harbor love to mention a phase, a stretch, or even, tongue-in-cheek, a tour of duty spent in New York. He speaks about his time there only when asked, and he speaks about it in almost purely professional terms. The endless hours he worked, the projects he shared, the colleagues he shared them with. Because he left and returned there so often on business, he'll say, each trip reinforced that this city was his home. There is more to his story, though possibly he's pushed it as deep into the recesses of his past life as the painting he has stored away a long time ago in his personal archives. Perhaps the confusion and guilt and fear have faded into genuine oblivion. This is far from true for the woman who calls herself Petra Coyle. Isa is the kind of girl some will describe, dismiss, as a siren or seductress. Others would appraise her type as naive, fragile, a delicate scrim through which the jaded among us claim to see disingenuous motives. Or she was that kind of girl, is or was. It depends on what you believe possible. It depends on whether you are Austin or Petra. Austin Kepner and Petra Anderson met her separately during the same week in an exceptionally beautiful October when the air seemed notably cleaner and clearer, constantly stirred by temperate winds, the views across rivers and parks more crisp in detail. It was the time of year when people who live in the city renew their vows to stay. I'm going to skip a little here. Okay. The figure drawing class had been advertised on the bulletin board outside the architecture firm's cafeteria. Pop-up studio, draw from a model and pay per class, cash only, BYO easel. The class met 2 nights a week in a makeshift wooden building adjacent to the fortified edge of the Hudson River, a few blocks south of the Intrepid and the Circle Line kiosk. Austin remembered noticing the building when it appeared, almost overnight, as if it had been built from a kit, plywood and glue. For barely a year, it had been a lively restaurant, popular because of its waterfront perch. And then, in a blink, it became a warehouse for equipment belonging to the Parks Department. And now, apparently, it was an atelier. Austin expected it to vanish one day as quickly as it had appeared. The first time, he was one of only 4 people to show up, other than the young woman who collected the money and the young woman who posed. He was also the only one to bring an easel. The other 3 sat on the floor and drew in their laps, one in a blank book hardly larger than a pack of cigarettes. When the model slipped off her robe, a raincoat the color of overcooked peas, Austin felt the blood gather in his groin. He was surprised, since he'd been to dozens of life drawing sessions back in college. Had he been deprived of sex for so long that any glimpse of a naked body could turn him on? But the model held her body in a way both pure and erotic, the translucence of her pearly skin heightened by the harsh light from the crude building's open fixtures, each of her ribs cradled in a stroke of shadow. The one startling aspect of her otherwise perfect anatomy was her abdomen, which was, Austin looked quickly around the room to see if anyone else showed similar astonishment, smooth. The model had no navel. At the end of the session, the money taker invited them to return 2 evenings later and to tell their friends. Same model, she said, perhaps knowing that this would give them, or one of them, greater incentive. At his office the next morning, Austin asked one of his coworkers, a guy named Saul, who bragged about his sexual escapades, whether he'd ever encountered a woman without a navel. Saul laughed. My man, you've led a sheltered life, or you're dating older than you need to. It's the new thing, getting your belly button cosmetically erased, closed up. Makes for a fine tattoo canvas, or maybe you could see it as the ultimate statement of independence. You are the product of parthenogenesis. Austin did nothing to hide his confusion. No umbilical. Get it? No roots, no family baggage. Symbolically? Down deep? Fuck you, Mom. At the second drawing session, 10 people showed up, and this time most of them had easels. Austin had to set up behind an older woman who drew with confidence and flair, so it surprised him to notice that she sketched in a dimpled navel every time she drew the model in frontal view. During the first break, most people stepped away to chat with others, check messages, or go outside for a smoke. The model pulled on her coat, stretched a little, and then she walked around the room, gazing earnestly at the various ways in which these strangers had rendered her body. Austin had remained at his easel, where he pretended to be occupied sharpening his pencils. This did not stop her from giving his drawing equal attention. Austin didn't mind. He had always been deft at drawing from life. More than one of his architecture instructors had told him that he might have had a successful career as a landscape or portrait painter had he wished to work in 2 dimensions only. "Oh," exclaimed the model when she saw the most recent drawing on his pad. In it, she was standing, facing him, hands on her hips, head turned in profile. Austin stepped back to let her look. He resisted the urge to make excuses about being rushed or how the raw light was so unflattering. When she lingered, he said, feeling absurd, yet too self-conscious not to speak, "You're good at this." She turned around and looked at him. "You're better." She gave him such an open smile that he laughed and compounded his own idiocy by saying, "Well, it's not my métier." Had he actually said métier? "I mean," he said, I'm an architect, playing hooky." "An architect," she said, her smile undiminished. Austin forced himself to look away from her large, dark green eyes. "Just an underling at one of the big firms. We're bidding on, if you can believe it, another addition to the Met. But me, I get to schlep all the way to Dubai, putting in my Emirates time. No fancy museums for me, not yet." How she took this in was unclear to Austin, but she seemed interested. He'd had a few short stretches of romance since moving to the city, but work and travel had become so voracious, cannibalizing his time and energy, that he hadn't bothered with sex in close to a year. And love, impossible to contemplate. Saul, the colleague who'd enlightened him on the matter of sewn-up navels, had even suggested that on his next jaunt to the Middle East, he'd take a detour to Bangkok for a long weekend. "Do I have an address for you?" said Saul. When Austin asked Saul to try and remember the last short weekend they'd been granted, his colleague said, "Just think about it. All I'm saying." Since then, Austin couldn't stop thinking about it. Now, as the money taker signaled the model that the break was over, she startled Austin by saying, "I'd like to go to a museum." After the third session, Austin asked if she'd be interested in seeing an exhibit at the Guggenheim the following weekend. He would have to work nearly through the preceding night to clear an entire afternoon, but he would cheerfully have worked through 2. He could hardly believe it. He would have her all to himself. So Isa spent her Saturday afternoon with Austin and her Sunday with Petra. Both of them were enraptured, mostly because, and neither of them was fool enough not to know this, they hadn't met anyone in a long time, or possibly ever, who radiated wonder the way Isa did, her naked delight in discovery, in seeing things she had apparently never seen before. Seeing was not so much believing, seeing was being, or discovering. Each new sight became a question. She had no fear of admitting that she didn't know about this or that painter while drinking in the pictures with evident joy, and she listened alertly to Austin as he told her about the place the Guggenheim held in the history of modern architecture. How it marked both the end of a magnificent career and the beginning of a new aesthetic for the city. A virginal moment, he called it. When they emerged from the elevator at the top of the museum, she rushed ahead to the nearest balustrade and leaned so far over that Austin was afraid she might fall. "Careful," he said. "It's so deep," she said. "Funny," he said after catching his breath. "I think of it as tall, so tall. But we are looking down," she reasoned, and he had to agree. There was nothing profound in her observation, not really, and yet as they descended, looping into and out of the cave-like galleries, he imagined the entire structure filling slowly, silently, with water. So he goes off to Dubai for a business trip, and then he comes back and she isn't at the modeling session, and he thinks he's lost touch with her. And then one day, just as he began to feel free of the previous week's self-centered delusions, he walked out of his office building at lunch, and there, right on the sidewalk, stood Isa. Right there. She faced the revolving door, her still presence parting the swarms of suited workers as they spilled into the cool autumn sunlight. She was waiting. "How did you know where to find me?" he said. "You pointed to the top of your building when we were walking after the museum." Then, right there, on a midday rush hour Manhattan sidewalk, not that many people would be easily diverted from their mission of hunting down the desired bagel, burger, or bento box, she did something startling. Isa took Austin's right hand in both of hers and guided it gently beneath the baggy sweater she wore under her ubiquitous raincoat. She pressed it palm side against her supernaturally smooth belly. She held it there for several seconds, gazing into his eyes. When she let go, he retrieved his hand, reluctantly. "I like how you really see me. Your drawings show it," she said. "I've been thinking about it, and I believe we're made for each other. I think you believe that too. Do you?" Austin laughed hysterically. "I'm happy to find out." They spent every night for the next 2 weeks in Austin's bed, and every spare daytime hour he could wrest from his schedule, walking around the city, dazed yet energized, as if they were tourists from far away. "Look," she would say, pointing at a bridge or a bird or a stroller holding twins, and each sight to Austin was miraculously, enigmatically fresh, even if he had seen it, even if he had seen it a million times. A pigeon was a miracle. Her body mesmerized him completely. He had no desire to ask about why she'd had her navel erased or why she had no body hair. And he was delighted when her verbal reserve gave way to a new expressiveness. She would ask for full accounts of his day, joyously, not jealously. And she began to show him drawings she did at the drafting table in his apartment while he was away. He did not mind. No, he loved it. That after a long, ardent, sex-soaked night, she stayed in his bed while he showered and dressed, that she told him she would see him in the very same spot whenever he came home. She had found a blank drawing pad in the top of his closet and the drawer in which he kept a supply of colored pencils, chalks, watercolors, and gouache, most of which he hadn't touched since school days. And with Isa in his bed, he could hardly continue attending the evening classes for which she posed. Let her be the artist now. Without their discussing it, she had essentially moved in with him. He didn't even want to discuss it, to jinx it. She began to fill the pages of one pad, and then another, with drawings of sea creatures, watery patterns, intricately curly-cued webs of fins, tentacles, shells, eels, reef-like fortresses bedecked with anemones, seaweeds, and fantastically floral outgrowths. He began to buy her bigger and more expensive pads of paper. "These are outrageous. I mean, outrageously good," Austin told her. "You need to show them to someone." "You're someone," she said. "I'm showing them to you." "I mean, you know, a gallery someone, somebody who might put you in a show," he said, although Austin knew he was ignorant when it came to the city's sophisticated, eccentric, perhaps impenetrably elitist art scene. Maybe her work was essentially conventional, but there was no denying its beauty and cunning sense of composition. At the very least, she should have been a successful illustrator, yet her only source of income, or all that he knew of, was her modeling job. "Can I take a few of these and show them to someone at my office?" he asked. No, they are not for anyone else, just you." Austin would have been an idiot not to puzzle at Issa's laser-like devotion to him, to them. And he knew that the depth of his sexual gratification half blinded him, but there was a reassuring simplicity to her unencumbered life. She was new to this place, and he was the lucky guy to find her first. And if she seemed almost suspiciously free of the usual phobias and emotional calluses that women brought to relationships, so what? Did all intelligent, creative people need to be tangled up in thickets of neurosis, their psyches riddled with the stigmata of previous heartache? This is what he knew. Issa made him happier than he could remember ever having been before. He wanted her, and he couldn't help feeling he deserved her. If she had parents and siblings, clearly she wasn't close to them. He knew that she had been born in France but wasn't French. She'd been born in a town destroyed by the sea, which would explain her obsession with images of the sea, wouldn't it? And after that, she'd lived all over. Did it matter, anyway, what passport she carried? The world was a place whose borders grew only more porous as time went on, or so it seemed back then. 1 month from the day she had waited for him outside his building, he called his parents and said, "I'm going to ask someone to marry me, and if she says yes, I'm bringing her out there to meet you." His mother was speechless. But Austin knew that more than anything, she wanted grandchildren, so she did not tell him he was rash or impulsive or ought to bide his time. Not that she could have changed his mind. "Man, you are bewitched," said Saul. "I hope it's not just that you were so damn horny." "Bewitched or not, sometimes you just know," said Austin. "Sometimes you strike gold. Or get struck by lightning," said Saul. Thank you.
How about another round of applause for author Julia Glass? Thank you, Julia. And now I'd like to invite one of Forrest Williams' students and a beloved member of the Falk community, Pat Kearns, up to the stage to introduce Forrest. Pat, come on up.
Hello. Hey. Okay. So when I can't, when I'm having trouble painting the figure because we're figure painting, then I just start writing down what you say in the workshop. So let's start with that. See in her hands a lot of blood see in her hands a lot of blood collecting in there. You might add alizarin too. She's been in the sun. That's about the model, so. We'll get back to that. Forrest Williams is a figurative painter who has shown his work in San Francisco, New York, a sold-out show, I think, in Portland, Oregon, a sold-out solo show, Montreal, and for numerous summers at Provincetown's Amp Gallery. He received his MFA in painting at the New York Academy of Art. He now lives and works in both New York and Provincetown. He has been described as a master in depicting the male form by the P. Townie. Yet it's noted that he doesn't take the easy road and instead works at his paintings, resulting in a feast for the eyes and intellect. This is his 4th summer teaching at Falk. And according to the Provincetown Independent, Williams was a standout literature student in college and was involved with theater, and after graduating, he moved to New York and interned at the storied Circle Rep Theater Company and cater-waitered. That's when he came out. Many of his paintings are set in gay bars, and there's an erotic yearning in the gaze of artist and subject, but they're less about sex than about loneliness and a lack of connection. In this way, Williams is like a gay hopper. And I think for me, like I was walking, I think it was late last fall, and I was walking down Commercial Street, and Amp Gallery was open, it's since closed, and I walked in, and there are these, some were smaller, but some larger oil paintings, and I could tell that by you. I didn't know you at the time. I could tell that there was time, and there was a deep respect for materials. And I was like, "Who did these?" And she was like, "Oh, like Forrest Williams," and the Debbie owns the gallery. And he was like, "Oh, you know, he's in New York. He's such a great guy." Blah blah. So I sent you an email because I was like, when you see great art in the deep off season in Provincetown, you reach out and you say thank you. All right, so here's one really quick. Here's a little like kind of list poem of things he said, and it's really short. Figure note. When painting the figure and getting it wrong, I want to start swearing at the canvas or board because it's flesh. Her body is very warm. It's a color choice. There's some darkness on the breast. You've got to find the darkness, push it. You can always pull the light back out. You're looking at relationships. What am I doing, I ask. This is what you're doing, says Forrest. You're looking at relationships. My relationships, I ask Forrest. The figure doesn't have any meaning without its context and space, says Forrest. She is the true fundamental form that's out front, he says. I'm gay, Forrest, I say. It's giving drama, Forrest says. Let it be the looseness. It's the circle of light that I'm talking about, says Forrest. It continues through the last pose of the morning. What should I wear for your artist talk, I ask Forrest. Stripes are directional, he says. They echo the length of something that draws your eye, gives a little more definition, otherwise this falls off. Oh, and what should I wear on my feet, I ask Forrest. The toe is a sausage shape that sticks out of the foot. The toe has a top and a side. So no shoes, I ask Forrest. Some knot of light, he says. I'm just telling you what's happening in there. There's a fairly clean plane of light in there. It's a lot to deal with, but you'll get there by paying attention. Look and see. Well, welcome to the stage, Forrest Williams.
Clearly doing too much talking. Less talking, more painting. But here I am. And funny you mentioned Hopper, who I didn't know he was not gay, but he's not, was not. But I'm going to start with a Hopper quote, which I have. Is this, can you hear? I'm not sure. Which I like to start with. Edward Hopper is a painter I like. He said, if you could say it in words, there'd be no reason to paint. And I start with a quote because I believe it to be true, at least for myself. And also, it kind of gets me off the hook from saying anything with words that's interesting or worthwhile for the next 15 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is just show you some images of my work, and I'll just talk about where I'm coming from. I do have some notes, so I don't get off track, but I'll try not to do too much reading, try to do a little more talking. So I think with me, more than anything, I'm just trying to get across a feeling, a point of view about how I see the world, and I'm trying to do it in sort of as economical a way as I can, visually. What interests me and always has is this place of tension between the containment and the expression of feeling. That sort of ambiguous place, and how to portray that visually. So I think of my paintings not really as real places or real people, but sort of as stages, like really a proscenium where a drama is playing out, but the drama is really more about an interior world than explicit action. There was a little blurb in The Independent one time I had a show, and the person called my figures psychological journeymen, which I thought was perfect. I really liked that term. Whether it's always the case, that's what I'd like to get at. I think that my work is inextricably linked to the fact that I'm a gay man. It's just part of the deal, and to the world I grew up in, and how it felt to grow up in that world. And I think a lot of it felt like it was about containment, about keeping things close and not revealed, holding things in. And I did write a quote by, I don't know if you know, Justin Vivian Bond, and a great artist and performer. And they said that they felt that they were taught to doubt themselves as a queer person. And I really related to that. And it's not the sole realm of being a gay or a queer person. I mean, everyone can relate to that sort of thing. But for me, it did kind of resonate. There's like a built-in thing there, a built-in kind of consciousness or self-consciousness. So for me, I'm trying to get it portraying kind of that sense of selfhood, of that experience of self-awareness in the world. So I'm going to start with an early painting. Let's see if I can do it. And I'm not putting this up because it's a good painting. This is an old painting from long ago, but I do think it's a window into the young me, trying to get that out there and also trying to connect with my classical roots. And so I called it Annunciation. And the thing about an Annunciation is it's a very quiet painting, an Annunciation. It feels almost passive and very contained and soft, but in that world of the painting of an Annunciation, what's happening is actually a revelation and in a way a burden beneath the surface of everything. So I think maybe that's kind of what I was trying to get at. And again, it's a very staged tableau, like an Annunciation, not necessarily a real place. And what it really is about is deep, contained feeling. This is another early painting of mine. This is a Bronzino. And the reason I put this Bronzino up is because it's in the Met, and I looked at it a ton, and I always loved it. And I always thought, this is the gayest painting. This is such a gay painting. But, sorry, I can't really see you with these glasses on. So, but why is it a gay? There's nothing explicitly gay, there's not two men naked, going at it. There's a formal rigor to it, and it's very, contained. And I sort of came to think that maybe it's just the ambiguity of the painting that is what struck me. It's just sort of a built-in thing to it, and that containment. So, of course, I tried to do my versions. I did many. Again, not Bronzino. This is a long time ago, but I think it is kind of about desire and doubt at once, and an attempt to try to connect to that world of classical painting, the things that I loved as a young man. And I started to get things in there like patterns, which were hints of another world, maybe just off the edge, and building in, doing diptychs and triptychs, so that you sort of have a built-in void that's never going to be passable between the figures, built in formally to just the way the thing is constructed. That's called Nexus. These were a series of bar paintings, and I was just trying to think of a way that I could do some formal things with the painting, like just painting planes and blocks of space and a blue bar, but maybe this thing could also function as a bar. So this is called blue bar, and this is called red bar. And this sort of idea for me of having a scaffolding, like a bar or something to kind of build a painting around, so that I'm not, I love painting the figure, I want to paint the figure. But you need a way in and some kind of way to construct a painting. And I was looking at these Ralph Eugene Meatyard photographs, I love his work, of a bunch of people on porches. And I just love the photographs, but I also thought, the porch is a perfect, like it's neither indoors nor outdoors. It's kind of this transitional space. There's an ambiguity about it, and neither a here nor there. And it felt like a nice setting for me, as well as formally a great way to kind of lock down a figure into a space and really construct an architecture, both two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. It's also a way of separating the figures, so that kind of worked for me both visually and thematically, but there's a bridge there too. They're connected in a way too by the I guess the construction of the thing. And little by little, this other thing started creeping in, just little hints of an outside world, maybe just past the edge, and the trees sort of became another character in this otherwise more linear world of horizontals and verticals and diagonals. And then, this is kind of boring going from like, and the next year, but it's just sort of giving you an evolution. I got in a show at the Gay and Lesbian, it's now the GLBTQ+, et cetera, Center in New York City, and they were doing a show of the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall riot, so that would have been 2009. And we got to pick a place where we could install something. So I just took a back staircase, hence the kind of cut off bit at the top, the landing between two staircases and just an exit stairway in the back. And I was trying to think of how I could make this thing fit in with the actual space it was being made for and sort of echo it and point to it and talk to it. And I thought that the arrow, it may be literal, but was a good directional thing for sort of, you know, implying that staircase thing. And then I could just put these figures onto this scaffolding floating in space. And maybe the arrows would start to do more than something decorative or directional, formal. They might also have meaning as a motif. So it kind of went with those arrows for a while, and I'd seen a stained glass window that had this arrow and sort of red curlicue pattern. So I just thought, well, this is a thing. Sometimes you'll see something like a pattern or a motif, and it just, like an arrow or a Bronzino painting or a meat yard photo of porches, and it will just send you off in a direction, and before you know it, it's becoming a body of work based on an arrow. And this is another example of gayness. These are teacup patterns, and I love English design, and these are 18th century English teacup patterns, and I just loved them, and I really wanted to paint them because I like pattern. And the one on the top is number 429. I just had put some arrows in the book. So I decided I wanted to paint it, and I don't love red, white, and blue for a color scheme so much, so I just took the pattern and did my own, and it kind of goes from that arrows series into these figures again floating on this sort of abstract pattern that kind of locks them down and in some ways separates them, but also is a bridge between them. And I think about this unbridgeable distance between men sometimes. Maybe that's a bit of a cliche, but I think there's something to it. You could say that about people in general sometimes, but this was sort of a way to talk about that, but let there be a bridge. I mean, there is a bridge there connecting them, which is the pattern itself. So hopefully it's working on a formal and a thematic way at the same time. And it's an idea called, excuse me, plasticity, meaning that the way that something is made and the thing that it's about are kind of inextricably linked. And to me, great art does that. Not saying I can do it, but it's something that I aspire to. And I think when you see a great work of art, and this can be any work of art, it can be a musical composition, a work of literature, you know, a poem, a novel, a painting. Form and meaning are so tightly linked up, it's hard to parse those, to what's the word I'm looking for, peel those things apart. And for me, that's sort of a thing to aspire to. Let's see, where am I? And the teacup design, just like the arrow and other things, just maybe want to read a quick quote from a writer named Lynn Freed, who wrote, quote, and the writers here may disagree with this, "Fiction does not come out of ideas. The sources of fiction are myriad and complex. A character in a situation, a phrase, a scene, a setting, a smell, anything at all but an idea attached to an intention." And this is not to say fiction or any art isn't about ideas, but for me, a way in, if I want to talk about a moment between containing and expressing emotion, that's just an idea, but I need a way in, and sometimes a teacup pattern like a smell you may have smelled, or a conversation you heard, or a character, is a way in to getting a whole body of work going. This is called Garden. And again, the trees are kind of creeping back in, so I decided to just go outside. And I'd been spending a lot of time upstate, and so I did a series of what I called woodsmen, which were just figures in this moody outdoor atmosphere, and the trees themselves became kind of markers of scaffolding to hang things on. And I thought of these almost as like medieval morality plays. Like they're very much sort of stage tableaus. And then the masks were a little bit about the unknowable. This is called Conclave. So they were a little bit scary, these sort of meetings in the woods. And I thought of them as sort of archetypal scenes, not a real thing. Almost like a book or a story. Well, this one I thought of as almost like Faust, you know? It's just like a scary kind of a meeting of these archetypal figures that had something to do with something kind of scary, which, you know, I'm not going to go into, you get it. This one was one of that series. It's a tiny painting, but when I finished it, I thought, I kind of said everything I ever had to say with this little painting. It's just like, and there's nothing to it, but, you know, it just, you know, I thought. So I moved from the woodlands to what I call the lowlands, very P-Town inspired, but also very inspired by George Stubbs, who was sort of considered this B-level English master painter, and I think he's a great painter, and did a lot of paintings of horses, which Victoria was talking about horses. I don't know that much about them, but there were these big open spaces where they would race the horses. There were little houses where they would feed and groom the horses in his paintings. So that left-hand side there is a lighthouse, edge of a lighthouse in Provincetown. But this is sort of a mix-up of Stubbs and P-Town. I mean, the left is recognizable as maybe a Long Point or Woodend, but that right is a little outbuilding from it that I just took from a George Stubbs painting, because this isn't necessarily about some real specific place. It's more about a feeling of that open vista, and that, again, it's kind of like a stage, kind of like a tableau. So you've got maybe a whatever that would be, a Woodend lighthouse or something out there, and then a George Stubbs 18th century Northern English outbuilding. This is a later painting of mine, which I put in. That joke's tired, I know. Called Whistler's Mother, as everyone knows. And the funny thing about this painting is that it's not called Whistler's Mother. It's called, which some of you may know, it's called Arrangement in Gray and Black No. 1. And I think that says so much about the way an artist thinks. That's why I put this up, or at least the way I think. And I mean all kinds of artists, not just visual artists. It's his mother. I mean, it's a fundamental relationship, but it, you know, once you're past that, I'm doing a painting of my mother, he's got to find a way to construct this thing, and he wants to do it well. And if you take a line through the center of that curtain, through the straightest line, I should have drawn this on the slide, it makes a perfect square that you can cut through, and her hands fit right into the center of that, of the diagonals of that square. The frame goes down the center, and then her knees, her thigh goes directly center, horizontal center of the painting. And if you look at that insane distance between her knee and her back, does that mean time's up, or I should stop? Or oh, okay, no big deal. It's completely anatomically inaccurate, and if you imagine if she stood up, she'd be this giantess looming way over everything, and it doesn't matter. I mean, who's thinking about that? It's about a tightly constructed painting, and about playing with form, with different tones. Very limited palette, but lots of different tones. I'm sounding a little bit like teacher time here, but I just wanted to give you a way into sort of how I think. And so I decided I would do my own arrangement, and I called it Night Arrangement. You know, not Whistler, but my own thing. And I pushed it rectangularly, but I made that curtain into a window. And again, these are sort of stage tableaus, but they started to be, for me, about sort of the night of the self, and about these sort of, let's see, I think I sort of wrote down. It's just kind of a stage upon which, for me, like an existential tableau is playing out, like an interior world. I had a model who posed for me for a few years, and he said, your paintings are like emotional purgatory. And I thought that was a good way to think about it. So I sort of think of it like that a little bit. But again, fundamentally, it's just an arrangement of squares and shapes and kind of building a stage on which you can plunk this poor little isolated figure. Where am I? Okay. This, I'm winding up soon. This is called Silent Noon, and it's really based on a kind of putrid, acidy green bathtub that I saw in an interiors magazine, and I really liked it, and I just wanted to paint this bathtub. That's really all it was. And I thought, well, I did some sketches. I thought I'll put the figure in it, and then I thought, well, I can get more of the figure if I seat him on the edge of it. And then I put him in a room, and I started thinking, well, I'm doing everything side to side. Let's try to go back to front and deal with the world in that way, and put two figures who are in the same space but in completely different worlds, and try to get them together. And this is called Doorway. This is called Visitor, and I'll just quickly say, I think sometimes placement, just where you place a figure, can say a lot. You know, it's a super simple painting. Also, you know, light and dark. That I meant to take out, but that is, that's my déjeuner sur l'herbe. Every artist wants to do their Manet, their déjeuner sur l'herbe, so that was one that I did. Okay, this is getting into COVID era. I started, oh, you know what? I didn't say from the beginning, Pat, thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you, Fine Arts Work Center. This is how I'm not thinking, for the privilege of being here. I noticed Nathan said it a lot last night. I was like, note to self, be sure to thank. Anyway, sorry, Nathan. I didn't measure up to that. So it's getting into COVID era, and the reason I thought of Pat, because he was talking about gay bars, I thought I'm going to do these series of bars that are sort of loose bars, and COVID hit, and I just was finishing with the models. I work for models, and I thought, then I'm just going to cover everything with pattern, because that's all I can do right now. I can't work with people. And I love these images of flames behind Elizabethan miniatures of the lovers, and I always wanted to do them. So I thought I'm just going to make the whole wall flames wallpaper and call it Flame Bar, you know, which is also a joke on the, you know, but back to the gayness again. I can't get away from it. And I thought of it as a 5-character painting. You know, the sort of protagonist of the painting. There's a figure who's just off stage or just left the stage, the drink. Then there's this sort of wry 20s, 30s film star commentator who's maybe the witness to the whole thing and making wry commentary. Then there's the city out the window, and then there's you, the viewer. And again, this to me had several characters. The mirror world, the quote, real world, the city outside, and then you, the viewer. This is called Night Bar. This is my work, and this is how I start. This is huge. I mean, there are little tiny sketchbooks of just scribbles and trying to think about things before I'd ever think of a model or how to organize it. And during COVID, this was sort of about indoors, outdoors, and I wanted this autumnal figure indoors, looking out at maybe a memory of summer or a figure outside, two different worlds at the same time. I don't think it was that successful, but I'm kind of still working with this a little bit. It's through the window. And this is a mess, but it's in the midst of being worked on right now, but I'm just kind of and thanks to Bonnard, this is not Bonnard, but it's inspired in some ways by Bonnard. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now and trying to make some sense of, and there's a lot of things going on. I don't know if I can make anything of it, but that's about it. And thank you, Fine Arts Work Center, once again, for giving me this privilege and joy of this week. Thank you.
Just taking notes, Forrest. I'm taking notes. Thank you again to Forrest Williams for super interesting, beautiful stuff. Thank you, Forrest. Okay, where the heck am I? Okay, now I'd like to invite one of Simonette Quamina's students to the stage, Pasquale Natale, to introduce Simonette. Pasquale.
Well, I had the great fortune of meeting Simonette 4 days ago. So it's brand new. It's a new love affair. She is an exceptionally generous, very kind and gifted teacher and human being. Printmaker Simonette Quamina was born in Ontario, Canada, and spent her childhood living between South Africa, South America, the Caribbean, and New York City. She earned her BA from the City College of New York and her MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. Her work has been exhibited in shows such as Figuring the Floral, Embody, and Artist I Steal From in galleries in New York and London. She will also be included this October in the Frieze Art Fair at Regent's Park in London. Her art has also been acquired in private collections, including the Fleet Library Special Collections. She has been featured in Collage Magazine, Art Spiel, Hyper Allergic, and the Riverdale Press. She is the recipient of the 2017 Salem Arts Work Fellowship, and in 2017, the Fine Arts Work Center Residency here in town. She is a gift to our arts community, and so please welcome Simonette Quamina.
Thank you for that introduction, and it's wonderful to be back, and thank you, Fine Arts Work Center, for giving me an opportunity to come back and teach a workshop. So I feel like I'm on a different end of the experience being here. Since it's a week of sharing and learning and working together, I figure I kind of show a different side of the work, also really just talk about process and where some of those ideas come from. I mean, it'll be easy for me to just kind of show the final piece, like, aha, here it is. But I also fight in the studio constantly, and my studio is always clean because of that, because those moments where the work isn't coming together, that's when I spend a lot of time cleaning, right? So the secret's out. I'm gonna start at a point that is pivotal in the direction of where my work has gone now. I am a printmaker, but my work is primarily, I would like to call them drawings that are informed by printmaking, the aesthetics of it, as well as collage as well, right? Also, my background and my personal history, my relationship with my family is part of it's a heavy part of my practice as well. And so it's built into a lot of the narratives that come out into the work. So I'm kind of taking you back to my second year of graduate school, and it's because it has a little bit of color. Not to say that I'm against color, but you might notice most of my work tends to be a little bit more monochromatic, because I work primarily, or most, okay, why am I lying? I only work with graphite, right? So I was exploring the idea, and I'm gonna kind of go through, because I put a lot of slides to kind of keep you entertained so you don't fall asleep. So I was working with the idea of narrative and storytelling, and I revisited Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, because at that time I was in graduate school and trying to figure out where I was going with my work, trying to understand why I was using color, how do I tell a story visually, with using the tools that I already have, and also using the materials that are readily available to me. When you're a graduate student, you can't really work, so you know, I had to rely on materials around where I don't have to go out and spend too much money on art supplies. So I fortunately had a job, I was TAing at Brown University, and I had access to their library, the John Hay Library, because I was TAing a bookmaking class. And they would typically throw out some of the chipboard, or I should say acid-free folios that they would keep manuscripts and so forth in, and they would be in great condition, but they will just swap them out. And I thought, hey, I'm a printmaker, you know, maybe I can do something with this. So I ended up playing around quite a bit with these archival chipboard or archival museum boards is what I would say. And I started thinking about how could I use it as a matrix, because I'm a printmaker, I can maybe put stuff on it, run it through the press, get a print, and so forth. So I started really playing around with it, but at the same time I was thinking about, as much as I love printmaking, how can I defy or like go against everything that it was supposed to be, right? And I was really thinking about the matrix as the final piece opposed to the print or the addition or that, consecutive number of the same thing over and over again as the final product. So I started having this idea as the print being the byproduct that just got me to the final place where the matrix is the final piece. So hence I have these pieces that are built to somewhat go through the printing press, but really it's just the matrix that is the final piece. And so I put this image of a small print by Albert Dürer just to kind of show where some of the influences were also coming from. So this one is called The Witches, or The Four Witches. And so this was an interpretation of that. It's about 9 feet tall, right? So I'm just kind of fooling around, drawing, rolling up the surfaces with printmaking inks and so forth. At the same time, I'm also, because I'm teaching a bookmaking class, I'm working with books and thinking about how I can still take the print out or off of the wall. How does it become a book? How does it become a 3-dimensional form, and so forth? And so this is a large-scale book. It's about 20 inches by 25 inches. And it's a series of silkscreen text, stories which I would write that relate to some of the images that are included in the book. And the images are all made from photogravure. And also some rubbings, or frottage is the correct way of saying it, right? So kind of just talking a little bit about the process, because I'm using materials that are very familiar but in unfamiliar ways, and also just using them because it's a way of still making and not having to, it's more economical for me at that time. So I was thinking about printing, and this is just when I was just graduated. It's like, oh, here's your degree, now get out. You don't have a studio, right? So I'm like, well, how do I still print? And how do I still make? And I don't have access to a printing press. So I really started to think about drawing because I had a heavy drawing practice. And I was thinking about how could I rely on some of the aesthetics of the print, meaning I can get all of these tonal changes, but just using one material, graphite. And that was kind of a challenge for me. Using materials that are already available, that I'm familiar with, but using them in unfamiliar ways. So I started working with tape, just regular painter's tape, or artist tape, and powdered graphite. And I was able to get a gradation of tones based on how long the tape would sit on the surface of the paper, how much graphite is applied to it, how much pressure I use as am I rubbing onto the paper, and then also how is the edge of the tape continue the language of drawing from it being torn versus it being cut, and so forth. And then how do I bring it all together, right? So this is just the earlier stages of me trying to figure some things out. And so it's all done with graphite, and at the same time, I'm printing this all hand printing at home because I don't have access to a printing press. And so it was quite a learning experience because I had to experiment and figure some things out. So this one's called Round Robin, and it's about 5 feet by 5 feet, just about. And it's really the moment where things start to really come together. I'm still working with that chipboard material and still thinking about printmaking, the matrix, so I'm pasting back in those chipboard materials into the drawings. But then I'm also, let's go back. But I'm also treating the surface of the paper as if it were a matrix, a print matrix, like a piece of copper. So I'm scratching into the surface of the paper. Technically what I'm doing is pushing the fibers below the surface, and it stays white, and then I rub the surface with it with graphite. So it emulates the act of doing a dry point or an etching, but it's all drawing. And then really relying on relief prints because it was the one technique that I can do at home where I can print by hand and or make collagraphs, which is another relief technique, to get textures and so forth and bring that back into the drawings. So here's one called Pearl Snatcher, and it's one of the only pieces where the figure, you see some type or some parts of the face. Otherwise, I generally do not include the face in any figures that show up in the work. And all of this is just all graphite. Even the inks that I'm working with is made from graphite. So I figured out how to make my own graphite inks and so forth. And this is called Swing, an ode to the romanticism in art. And I was looking at it was my own commentary on art history and where I fit into that narrative as an artist, also as a woman, and also as a woman of color, right? And so collage really became such a heavy part of the practice in making, and it took me quite some time to figure out where that language or where it was coming from. And you know, I always go back to this story about my grandmother and just at an early age watching how resourceful she was. And I'll never forget her taking apart like an entire dry coconut and using every single part of it, right? The husk gets, you know, it opens up, there's the husk, that goes into like an outdoor oven that she had to make bread later in the day. And then the hard shell gets cracked open. The water that comes out of it, you could drink that. She shucks the meat out of it, grates the meat, squeezes it, gets coconut milk to cook dinner with, and then all the little husks that you got from the grating, she mixes that with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and then it turns into these little cookie-like bun things that we snack on, and then the shells go back into the oven to bake, you know. So it's just like this reusing and everything, right? So, you know, from kind of thinking back on that, I understood where a lot of my attraction to collage came out of, was from those experiences. So you might not see them, but every little piece on the bottom, it's little scraps of paper. So I tend to don't throw things away, especially paper. It's scraps of paper that are specifically torn to a certain size and shape, and then they're individually rubbed with graphite. And also to continue the language of drawing, depending on the direction in which the paper is torn, if it's towards me or away from me, the fibers are exposed very differently and the graphite holds on to it. So in some areas it'll be darker and it continues that line or that act of drawing, which is a little bit more evident in Pearl Snatcher, where you see the tearing for the building and the roof. That's all from just tearing the paper and letting the raw fibers show through and hold the graphite. So I'm like discovering all of these things as I'm going along. And this one's about 9 feet. And this is called Mr. Farrell's Plum Roast Tree. And it's all graphite. Now, the difficult thing about working with graphite is, and one of the things that attracted me to it was its ability to reflect and absorb light. So there's quite a lot of experimentations that goes on in the studio, sanding the paper, how's the graphite going to hold onto the paper in those sections if it's treated a certain way. If you rub the graphite really hard, does it get shiny? Does it reflect the light now instead of absorbing the light and so forth? So I worked really large. I kind of stuck these in here and just kind of going back to this idea of reusing materials. I kind of got a little cheeky here with this project. So, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, printing, taking the print off of the wall, and I kind of stumbled upon these little old cassettes in like Savers, the thrift shop. And so I picked them up and I didn't know what I wanted to do with them. I take them back to the studio, and then I thought, well, it's like plexiglass, it's acrylic. I wonder how it'll look if I do some little dry points in that. And they look like little books, right? When you think about cassettes, and I thought about, wow, that's so crazy. Like my niece doesn't even know what a cassette is. Won't it be funny to, you know, do something, record myself as I'm working, because I'm like, she probably won't even know that you can take a little piece of paper, stuff it into the top, and then record back over the cassette. Does anybody remember doing that? Yeah, right? And then, but it was like, oh, and then where do you buy a cassette player? So I ended up working on a series of little books, or little vignettes, as I like to call them, and they're all dry pointed with imagery, and the imagery relates to the little book inserts that goes inside of it. And then as I'm doing the dry points, I'm like talking and there's a narrative going on, but only if you have a cassette player, then maybe you can listen to it. So this is where I got a little cheeky, right? So this is a series that I worked on, and it was quite interesting because quite often I'm showing my studio. So there's a lot of drawing and sketching that happens. And I do it very repetitively, over and over and over again. And they tend to be on the smaller scale, hence the little cassette book, because I realized the drawings from my sketches are so intimate and they have a very different feel opposed to the very larger scale drawings that I do. And each one has a purpose. So the larger scale drawings are intended to make the viewer come into that space. And you have a different reaction to it. The edges, if you notice, I don't like to work with straight edges. My edges are always shaped, and you know, it's intentionally done so to bring you into the narrative and allow you to come out of it in multiple places, and you can take on different readings within the one image. A lot of prepping happens, so scraps, I use pieces of old linoleum or scraps that are left over, and I would start to make patterns. There's a lot of drawing. There's thinking about where the patterns are going to go into the prints. And then I'm showing this because sometimes, you know, even though I'm doing all of these sketches and drawings, and I might have one composition that could work, I also leave room for things to change and the work to organically get to the point where it needs to, right? But there's still always like a general idea, and there's always a narrative that it's coming out of. So just to kind of show you, there's a huge bit of sketching, and this is the only time I would ever use charcoal. So vine charcoal is used to just to sketch out from scale up from the smaller sketches, and then it gets rubbed out, and then I can start to fit in or collage back in the printed pieces, right? So that little scrap of linoleum, I carved a pattern, and if you can see, I've printed all the little pieces that then get tiled together, to create an image like that or part of the robe. Right? And then this piece can function in multiple directions as well. So going along with how things get chopped up, screwed, and put back together. So this is an image that I started off with, and at the moment, it just did not feel right. But I was playing around with the reflective quality of the graphite and thinking about how I can squeeze in or layer multiple stories within one picture plane. So if you're one side, or depending on how you move around the drawing, you would only see one narrative. And if you switch to the side, things start to show out depending on how it's lit or where you are within that room. So this is just to kind of show you a little bit of that. But then it didn't feel right. The narrative couldn't flow the way it should, so I chopped it up, tore it up. And this is just some details of the torn paper, just trying to figure out where things are going to go. And in the same time, I knew where I wanted to go with the drawing, so I started to make something called silk aquatint, which my class is doing starting tomorrow. So using remnants from silk screen mesh, this like loose fabric, I stretched it over a piece of chipboard, and then I worked in an additive way, add in paint so it blocks out the mesh from the fabric. It's inked up with ink, it's ran through the press, and I ended up with this really large print, and I had to piece it together because the press is only so big, right? But I did that because I know it's gonna get cut up and brought into this larger piece collage. So this piece was made for the Museum El Barrio in New York City for one of the shows, maybe 2 years now. And so just to kind of show you the scale, those are two of the handlers kind of putting it together, and it's about 13 feet long. And this is it when it's up on the wall. So the great thing about it, well, I shouldn't sound like that, the great thing about it. But one of the wonderful things about the graphite is that you have to really move around around the piece or back and forth to really start to see certain parts of the narrative coming out. You would see fingers, hands, someone lurking, and so forth. So yeah, and then here we have another one. This is called Sing a Song, My Little Kiss Kitty. Foliage also plays a very important part in the narratives. It adds another layer, but if you're not familiar with certain plants and what it is that they do, it's fine because it still kind of is aesthetically pleasing. At least I think so. So here's an example of the matrix being the final piece. So the piece on the left is actually the surface from which the print is pulled from. And it's made from corrugated cardboard. So all of the parts of the skirt, it's the corrugation, you know, the cardboard, you peel off one layer. And that's what's been inked up and pasted, and then just chipboard from the back of a drawing pad that's been kind of shaped, cut, and pieced together, and some gel medium and some blue painter's tape. So there's this series of 5 prints, and these are about 3 feet large, and I printed them while I was here as a fellow. So thank you, Fine Arts Work Center, for that. This one's between Mary Jane's Shrouded Thoughts. And as I'm making these, I'm also thinking about, well, what is a print, right? Like, what if I printed all of the material and then collaged them back together? Is it a drawing or is it a print? So that's something that I'm like always questioning, because if you think about it, a print is, you know, it passes through the printing press, but all the pieces have been printed, but they're just brought back together, you know, on a larger form, or pieced back together, I should say. So this one's called Bird and Market Massacre. And this is Confirmation in Victoria's Regius. And this was influenced by Michael Mazer and being in the print studio and going to the museum, and saw these wonderful monoprints that he did. And I thought, oh my God, it was just a pivotal moment. And I came back and I thought about it. And so this is loosely based on the national flower of Guyana in South America, where I grew up. And it's the Victoria Amazonica lily. It's the largest lily pad in the world. And it grows to about 6 feet, and it can hold the weight of a human. However, it's very beautiful, and it grows 1 flower in the center, and it blooms only for 3 days. When the bloom comes out, it goes from white to pink, and it's pollinated by these beetles as well. So here it is, you have this beautiful lily pad, it's very inviting, but below the surface, it grows in murky and muddy waters. And underneath it, it grows these vines that are like vines that are very tendril-like and spiny. So if you fall over, you might not make it back out. So in the corner, you notice there's some hands kind of reaching out and coming out, so hence the title, Confirmation in Victoria's Regius. So only if you really spend some time with the piece, things start to emerge. And here's just a close-up of that. And it's all made from Japanese paper that's been pasted onto cotton rag. So also the materials that I'm using add to the narrative of the works. There's a lot of pasting or merging of different papers from different cultures, and it kind of comes together as well. This one's called Family Crest, and it's just made from remnants of that same museum board that I had, and kind of just hanging around. So this is kind of where I am now, just kind of really experimenting with the graphite and thinking of it as almost like painting in a weird way, even though I'm not a painter, and I have, you know. But I'm really screen printing or creating grounds first, in which the graphite and the drawings then sit on top of, and the grounds are made from graphite. So I'm actually using silk screening or screen printing mediums, mixing the graphite into it, screen printing on the back, and then kind of starting to work on top of that. And then what I'm also discovering is that the screen printing allows me to have a kind of a more painterly water-like effect to some of the parts of the drawings. And it also sets the graphite in place, so it doesn't transfer as much. So it's almost like a solution to a fixative. And so that's kind of where I am now. Pitchy, not so patchy. And I don't know how I am with time, but I'm just gonna kind of go ahead. And this is the Night Gardner, and all of these are graphite and collaged in pieces from rubbings and relief prints brought back into the pieces. And this is my last piece that I just finished up. And this one's heading off to a couple shows as well. So yeah, and this is where I am. Yeah.
Holy crap. Let's have another round of applause for Simonette Quamina. Amazing. And can we have Forrest and Julie come back up to the stage? We'll do a little Q&A. I'll get you set up. It's for you.
Oh, okay.
The only thing we ask is that you wait for wait till you get a microphone because we're live streaming and we want our guests at home to be able to hear the questions that you ask. So, anybody have a question for any of our wonderful faculty?
Well, David, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Can we have the lights up so we can see people's faces? Everybody's in dark silhouette, or will?
Yes.
Or is that?
Ta-da.
Thank you.
Any questions? I got a question. But I'm going to wait for the, thank you. Waiting for the mic, following the instructions. This question for Simonette. Can you talk about why you don't include faces or in your prints?
So I have this idea about reflective transparency, or at least that's what I call it. It's me as an artist being transparent in the work that I'm like, it's you're kind of bare for everybody to see, right? But the viewer, in a way, reflect their own experiences back onto the narratives because, it's the associations they have with what gender is or what race means to them. There's no real, there's color to me in the work. I see color, but there's no definitive flesh tone or pigment for you to, be specific to that. So they're reflecting their own experiences onto the drawings. And I feel like the moment you put, or at least for me, the face isn't necessary because it kind of takes away from that experience that I think that I want the viewer to have. Yeah. If that answers it. Yeah.
Any more questions way back there?
I guess this could go for all three of you, but what was the gateway into your artwork? What was the thing that spurred you into making, and do you still follow that initial, I'm not sure, what word I'm looking at, impetus, yes, do you still follow that same impetus?
Well, I'll just start by saying one could answer that question as a gateway into a particular body of work or a particular book in my case, but I'm going to take that question as into being a fiction writer because I actually started out as a visual artist and that was my education, and I went to New York like a lot of other people and with an ambition to be a successful painter, supported myself though with my word skills. In fact, my first published writing was a pet column for Glamour magazine, which was only to support my painting. But I read like a maniac. I read all the books I would have read if I'd been an English major in college and way beyond, and I read a lot of fiction and translation. And what I came to understand is that although I still love going to museums and I love art, and I had such a good time tonight and last night looking at the work, and it always makes me have this pang of envy because I didn't choose that road. However, what I understood is that for me, the most moving piece of art, with no offense here, will always be a great work of fiction. It actually happened the epiphany was after I read Daniel Deronda by, which is not George Eliot's best work, but I could go into that, I won't. And I had found myself, instead of on my weekends going to museum shows, I would sneak to the Strand bookstore, like I was having an affair, like, wait a sec, I'm supposed to be at the Guggenheim, and and as you can see, visual art makes its way into my own work, but that's what it was for me. So for some people it might be an opera, but when I understood that, I knew that what I wanted to do was tell stories, and that's just always going to be true for me.
What was it about Eliot's book that, in particular, and which one is her best?
Well, I haven't read them all, my goodness. I agree that Middlemarch is a perfect book. That's the line, and it's true. And Daniel Deronda is a it's kind of a willfully political book. You know, she has a real, talk about, you know, fiction, oh wait, it was your quote, right? Fiction not being based on ideas. I liked
It was Lynn Fried.
Lynn Fried.
Fried's quote,
No,
not my
but
quote.
I mean, you know, what's interesting is that my way of approaching fiction is that way. I don't, but there are people who use ideas. Like, there's a great, by the way, there's a great interview with Barbara Kingsolver that Ezra Klein did a few weeks ago about how Demon Copperhead came to be. And it's a wonderful, I mean, anyway, and it's because she wanted to write a novel about how the opioid crisis has hit Appalachia. That's an idea. Took her 2 years to figure out how to, as she said, she circled the house. What was the key? The key was Charles Dickens. Okay, that's her story. For me, though, the character of Gwendolyn Harleth, who is the female protagonist opposite Daniel Deronda, is a character you begin by loathing. That she is opportunistic. She uses her beauty as a kind of weapon. I mean, she sort of has to, because it's also about money and society, and you know, she's trapped in that, having to make a wealthy marriage for the sake of her family. But she's vain and loathsome. By the end of the book, she has broken your heart, because what she goes through, I mean, she is broken. And when I got to the end of that book, I thought, what has this story done to me? You know, people talk about fiction as teaching empathy and compassion, but there was something about that particular experience that I was traveled along with this character I could not stand and wanted her to suffer injustice. I mean, not injustice, justice, and she does. And to come to the end and weep for her. And just, you know, that for me is what great fiction can do. It's about, you know, the great stories to me are about endurance. You know, how humans are so fragile, but they're also strong. You know, how do we fragile people endure the most unendurable things? So anyway, that's my story. Did that give you guys time to figure out how to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm like, I will go after that. You go.
I'm the word person.
I just like looking at pictures, you know, always. and always the pictures I like looking at most were pictures of people. And if I walk into a room, like a house or a museum, if there's the first thing I'll probably go to and look at is an image of another person. I mean, maybe it's the narcissism of the human condition, looking for ourselves reflected in things, although that could be a lot of things. It doesn't have to be that literal. But I really love your work, Simonette, and I was thinking about looking at it, and you're saying that you can discover things and taking time with it, and I would be looking for those fingers or those images peeping out, or, you know, I think it, you know, it's always, that's sort of always what I'm looking for. Yeah, so.
Oh, she has a question, yeah.
Is there a particular like book of photographs that stands out to you as kind of the first one you had to keep looking over? And also, babies look at their mothers to know themselves, and their
I think we
caregivers
look
to know
for
themselves.
reflection to figure out
Right,
kind of who
yeah.
we are,
It's
and
not
maybe
just
that's what I'm doing with my
narcissism.
work, is trying to
Yeah.
figure myself out. You know, in a way, like there's self-portraits in a kind of way. But there's a ton, I love photography, even though I don't do it. But the one photographer that I really love is a guy named Bernie Imes. I don't know if you've ever looked at
What's
Bernie
the last
Imes.
name?
Imes, I-M-E-S, Bernie Imes. He photographed a lot in the South. He photographed a lot of images of people in what's called juke joints, which you may or may not know what those are. And they're very beautiful. They're very rich in color. They're composed with these juke joints are just little homemade spaces to go into, to relax, party, whatever you're doing. And sometimes they're just made of fundamental scraps of things. So what am I saying? What am I getting at? I guess just the way things are constructed, and then putting people into this, they're almost like little stages, these places. And so, yeah, I love Bernie Imes. You should check him out. Yeah. A lot of it's in the South, and I grew up in the South, so that's interesting to me.
Let's see if I can figure out this question as I'm having it. But Forrest, well, for Forrest and Simonette, I was struck in the work where you went out into the woods, how much the brushstroke changed. Just the kind of texture of the painting felt really different. It felt looser, and I was like, oh, which painters is he thinking of? I mean, and then later when you were talking about Bernard, I thought, oh, I see that. But in the woods paintings, was that a overt choice?
I'm not that consciously aware of it, but I think that in a lot of the paintings, there's a very controlled situation. Like I'm in my studio in New York where there's a model, there's a wall, there's a light, a clip light on them. It's all very controlled. And then you take something outside and it's less of a controlled situation, and I think it starts to get
The
more
brushstroke are a lot
expressive,
looser, yeah.
expressionistic, looser, and things like that. Also, I think over time I've gotten maybe more comfortable with paint, so I'm willing to let it just be paint rather than like that bronzino that I showed earlier that I love. It's very polished and refined. You're not seeing brush strokes,
Well,
you know. And I used to admire that, you know, the hiding of the paint, kind of, you know.
A lot
the,
of your
the
other ones
magic
have
of it.
that, you know, and the pattern ones. But, and then this is sort of the double question for both of you, and then I wonder if it's relatable in terms of your work in fiction. I don't know how to transpose the question, but both of you seem, obviously you're a figurative painter, but you're also a figurative printer, but both of you also have this aspect of the work that's very big in abstraction. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I was really intrigued by that.
I don't know. I think,
You want me to make it a question? What do you think about that?
I know, I'm not really thinking. I don't know, I never really set out to, or think about it being abstract, but I think that just naturally happens because of the process and the techniques that are being used, where things get flattened and shapes become, or things just become shapes and forms, and I guess that's where the abstraction comes in, or like I'm emulating a space, but I'm emulating it through pattern and textures and like to torn paper. But yeah, I don't know if that answers.
I agree with you. I was just going to say shapes. I think that when you think about everything is abstract in the end. You know what I mean? I mean, an abstraction can be abstract, or you can take it to another level where they're actually you're making it represent things. It's like, oh, that's a person, or that's a plant. But I was just talking to the students about it. I think it's like the Whistler's Mother, which is arrangement in gray and black. You're really thinking on an abstract level about shapes, forms, colors that meet one another and what they do to one another. The construction of the thing is really like abstract formal ideas that may just be about a pleasing visual image, or putting something off to the side, and then that might have an emotional, what's the word, pardon? I need a writer, thank you, an emotional resonance. Yeah, so they're always, to me, working together, the abstract and the representational. But I see a lot of both in your work, actually. I see a lot of both in your work.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And you know what? And as you were talking, I was just thinking about where the work comes out of. A lot of times it's from writing. So when you
From writing?
yeah. So I would, or even conversations with family members, and like one line can stick out, and I'm like, oh. And then my brain starts going, and I'll write like a quick little narrative or thoughts about it, and then I'll obsess about it, like, okay, how do I put that visually? Like, what kind of story could I put together from that? And then comes the sketching and figuring things out. So in a way, I guess that's where the abstraction also comes in, because I'm like creating these spaces that don't necessarily exist, but like, yeah.
So, last night we were looking at Mark Adams' work,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
combines text
Text
and have you ever thought of, and you showed us that book, of course, the storyteller in me there was a story called Scrap, I think, and I'm like, can I read that story? I'm like going to read the story.
Right.
So you have done work that combines text and, even those little cassette books.
Yeah,
kind
but
of play with
they're still kind of separate, though.
Okay.
Like, I've never felt the need to bring them together for them to function simultaneously. It's always like, this is a thing and this is a thing. But then as a book, I guess that I just contradicted myself, because as a book, it's the text and the image coming together, right? So, I guess.
were you told that your book had to have text in it, in that project?
No, but I do have books that I didn't put in, where it's just all visual. and it's just how do you carry a story without the text, and just tone and shapes and so forth. But then again, I did that in an old book, so it did have text. Okay, never mind. So you're giving me something to think about now. But yeah, okay, yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Oh, your reading was so. Oh my God, you just cute me right in. You was just like, what? Oh.